my great pleasure to introduce to you Ann Heppner, Region 2's Judging Director, and she's going to give you a talk on performance science.
Very good. Thank you. All right, so today we're going to talk about performance science theory, and I would like to also thank Patty Hannon, who years ago wrote a dissertation on performance science theory and presented it at National Congress, and she was kind enough to take a look at my presentation in PowerPoint and gave me permission to use her information. I found when I read her information, I felt that it was such a wonderful way for us to categorize our deductions and to understand gymnastics. So we're going to talk about four things today. We're going to talk about alertness and selective attention. We're going to talk about external, internal amplitude and performance quality. We're going to talk about the grandmother skill, and we're going to talk about inductive and deductive reasoning. So the first thing we're going to talk about is alertness. So we know that when we look at gymnastics routines, we want to be alert. We want to make sure we have enough rest, make sure that we aren't under a lot of stress, that we have hopefully left all our problems at the door so that we are there to focus on that gymnast. We want to make sure that we maintain our alertness throughout the meet, which we know can get kind of long sometimes. So we want to make sure that we maybe get up and walk around the table, we maybe get a drink of water, make sure that we have the things at hand so that we can maintain the same amount of alertness throughout our sessions. Selective attention, we want to make sure that we understand, we all believe that we are excellent multitaskers. So most of us are women, and they say that women are great at multitasking. So unfortunately, science does not back us up on this. So the more tasks that we take on, the more divided our brain actually gets. Our prefrontal cortex tries to solve the problem or the scenario that we're dealing with, and once we put something else into the mix, our brain actually has to engage another area. So our brain ends up getting divided or split in its tests and has to switch back and forth. Our effectiveness degenerates and our accuracy degenerates. So we really aren't very good at multitasking. The thing that we know that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So there are some things that we can do together. The more automatic we make a skill, the easier it is for us to add another skill to that. So for us as judges, this means that we want to get as automatic as we can in our shorthand. We want to be sure that as soon as we see the skill, our hand is writing the shorthand. We don't even have to think about it. We have all that stored in it as totally automatic, just like walking. So that's one way that we can help ourselves be able to do more than one task at a time. So with selective attention, the other thing that we need to do is be sure that we select in all the data that we need and we need to record. So we need to be paying attention to degrees of split, height of trajectory, all those sorts of things are the things that we need to select in, and we need to select out all the other extraneous stuff. We need to be sure that when we arrive at the meet, we put our chairs in the most optimal position that we can for viewing without a lot of background stuff going on, not a lot of movement in the background. We can't always arrange things the way we might like them to be, but we can do our best if we arrive at the meet in a timely manner and see if we can move things around to optimize our view of the routine. So sometimes we're distracted by leotards, by hairstyles, by messy buns, or crazy braiding jobs, or other things like that. We need to make sure that those are things that maybe we can look at those things before a gymnast gets up so that we're not distracted by them, so we know what that leotard is going to, all those glittery things are going to be on the leotard, and anything like that that might distract us that we can look at ahead of time. All right? All right, so under our things that we want to select, we want to learn how to manage our deductions better. So we have three categories that we're going to look at for managing deductions: external amplitude, internal amplitude, and overall performance quality. So external amplitude for us is the relationship of the gymnast to the apparatus. So the relationship of her to the bars, the relationship of her to the beam, to the vault, to the floor. So where she is at the height of her trajectory, where she is in relationship to the apparatus, I'm sorry. So we need to decide what area of the gymnast we need to focus on in order to be able to recognize it automatically. So usually for us, it is the hip and the torso area that we're going to focus on, and other things are going to be in our periphery. So that will give us the most information on height of split, height of flight skills, height of saltos, so that we can recognize external amplitude right away. So it could be that with different moves, we may need to slightly adjust our area of focus. So for some moves, it may not be the hips, it may be higher up on the torso or a different area. So we need to be familiar with the moves, know them well enough that we know what we need to focus on. Internal amplitude is the relationship of the gymnast to herself. So now we're looking at degree of split, completeness of turns, salto positions, those sorts of things are internal amplitude. So usually with internal amplitude, we may be focused on the hips or on the torso so that we can recognize our external amplitude. And so our internal amplitude deductions sometimes are in our periphery. So we need to learn whether or not we can see those well enough. Sometimes we might need to move back a little bit. We need to make sure, if we need to shift our gaze, we need to make sure we know when we can shift our gaze, when we've already ascertained the external amplitude, and we can focus on other aspects. We need to make sure that we know whether or not the gymnast has just flung her arms into position, or she has a plan and has placed her arms in a position. We need to make sure that we can see feet, so we know whether the legs are tight, the feet are flexed or pointed, so that we can ascertain what the internal amplitude looks like. And again, we need to know the moves well enough that, that we know where we can look. All right? Let's see. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the grandmother cell. So for us, when we see our grandmother, we recognize her as our grandmother, no matter whether she has changed her hairstyle, she's lost weight, she's got a different dress on. We recognize her as grandmother because we recognize her grandmotherness. So we have a group of cells in our brain that stores facial things and other things so that we recognize that quality of grandmother. So as gymnastics judges, what we want to do is we want to have that same category for every single move that we see. So we want to have, we want to recognize a move by the best, the most excellent performance that we've ever seen of that move. So, for example, if we are looking for the grandmother of all Tkachevs, we want to see a Tkachev that has a nice fluid downswing. It's released at the height of its trajectory. It's got a beautiful body position upon release. It has a nice high trajectory over the bar. We finish the move by, making sure that we have a straight body, we have a nice swing through the bottom of the bar so that we can go on and do another awesome move after the Tkachev. So we need to have in our library of skills that perfect Tkachev, the grandmother of all Tkachevs. We need to have the grandmother of every single skill. We need to understand the technique of the skill. We need to understand the perfect execution of that technique. And we need to understand how it's going to look. We need to be able to envision it. So unfortunately, we know that we don't see that grandmother skill every weekend while we're judging gymnastics. So sometimes we're kind of like the frog in the water. We say, oh, that was pretty high. But then if we go back and look at that grandmother skill, we realize that really it could have been huger, could have been higher. So we want to make sure that we are always going back to looking at excellent videos, to watching really good gymnastics, to judging gymnastics with higher level judges so that we understand what a skill should look like. We need to listen to coaches, we need to understand technique, so that we know what the grandmother looks like. The other thing is that we need to, as I said, store that skill, and we need to store all of them in our heads as that grandmother skill, so that we need to constantly be updating our grandmother skill library. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about overall performance quality. That's our third aspect. So overall performance quality is where our artistry deductions come into play. Here we're looking at how a gymnast is presenting her routine. Is she confident on the beam? Does she work the beam like she was standing on the floor? Does she engage us in her floor X routine? Does she like her floor X routine? Is she presenting it so that we're excited to see it? Are her bars nice and swingful? Does she do her vault like Michaela Mulroney did her vault, so that all of us have the same exact expression in our faces that Cheryl Hamilton had on her face? Because we know when we saw that vault on TV, we all have that expression on our faces. And that's what we're looking for in overall performance quality, something that gives us that excitement about gymnastics again. So here's one more way to view our categories. Many of us are educators. So if we think about external amplitude, internal amplitude, and overall performance quality, and we think of them in terms of proficiency. If we have a gymnast who is proficient at a skill, that's going to be our grandmother. So a proficient gymnast in the performing that skill in the proficient category is going to have very few deductions, maybe 0.05 deductions, nothing probably up to a tenth. That's our grandmother. The next category for us as educators is meets. So this is a big basket. We have a lot of gymnasts that meet the criteria for a skill, and again I'll use the Tkachev because it's easy for me. We recognize that skill as a Tkachev, but it may have problems with the swing through, may have problems with the height, may have problems with body position, maybe some flexed feet, maybe some bent legs. It may have problems with the follow through. Maybe we don't have that nice extended body on the other side, a nice swing through. So, like I said, the deductions can be in a big range for the meets category. They meet the criteria, they're doing the Tkachev, they have flight, they catch the bar, so it meets the criteria. In the third category is the does not yet meet category. So in does not yet meet, we're looking at a gymnast that possibly releases and gets over the bar but doesn't catch the bar. Or we're looking at the gymnast that releases, ends up without a good swing through, releases and ends up landing on the bar. She can't quite get over the bar. Her body has all sorts of problems. She's doing gymnastics in the fetal position. And so her coach has to step in and save her life. And so she now does not meet the criteria for the Tkachev. So we have to decide what else we can do with that skill. So if we're talking about another skill like a switch leap that is in the does not meet category maybe doesn't have enough angle of split on the switch part, so the first switch is not at the correct angle, and so we have to think about what criteria it does meet. Can we give that leap just a split leap? Can we give her a split leap for it? Does it meet that criteria? So in the does not yet meet category, we have to do maybe a lot more thinking about what we can do to benefit the gymnast and what kind of criteria she has met, if she has met any for any skill. All right? So that's just another tool that might be helpful for you in thinking about these moves and categories. So another tool that we want to talk about is inductive and deductive reasoning. So with inductive reasoning, we take all the pieces that we have. We take the recognition of the skill, the deductions that we need to apply, how the skill was done technically. We put them all together, and this is kind of what a beginning judge does. She has all these categories that she's having to juggle and think about and put them together and just to come up with an evaluation of that skill. What we want is to move through that inductive reasoning stage to deductive reasoning, where we see a skill and automatically we know that the deduction is 2/10. So we recognize the angle. We haven't even thought about the angle, but we recognize when we see that it's going to be a 2/10 deduction. So we need to make sure that we are able to apply those deductive graphs and things automatically to a move when we see it. So we recognize it right away and we know what the deduction is. We don't have to think through the process. So we're using those deductive graphs that USA Gymnastics has given us in our code of points: the degree of turn, height of release, amplitude of casts, height of jumps, and degree of split. So all those graphs we use, and it's a good idea for us to get used to looking at videos with higher rated judges and applying those graphs right to the videos so that we can see automatically those degrees, so that we apply those deductions automatically. So just wrapping up here, we've looked at alertness and selective attention. We've looked at external amplitude, internal amplitude, and overall performance quality. We looked at the grandmother skill and building our library of grandmother skills, and we talked about inductive and deductive reasoning. So just to wrap up, I want to read a quote for you from Patty Hannon. "Quantifying judging performance will allow the opportunity for judges to analyze their various strengths and weaknesses and take proper action to improve overall judging skills." Patty Hannon. Thank you.